This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I use my 43 years of nursing experience to help you understand what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City. I'm here to ask questions you may have while listening to our broadcast. And if I miss what you want to know, contact us on our website. We are both here because we believe that the more you know, the better prepared you are to make difficult decisions.
So please relax, get yourself a beverage and something to eat, maybe a muffin, some hot chocolate, and thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me. In the first half, we have our recipe of the week from Charlie. In the second half, we're going to talk about helping children with grief for the holidays. And in the third half, we have an interview with Miranda Featherstone, a social worker and essay writer at the New York Times. So, Charlie, what are we cooking this week?
Well, since we're focusing on children for this episode, we decided to share a traditional and easy recipe you can make with your kids. Remember the Christmas wreaths made using cornflakes and cinnamon candles? They're fun to make and eat.
Candles? You put candles in your wreaths?
I really need it.
My mom never let us play with fire.
Candles, candies, maybe a stronger prescription for these glasses. Hey, you know what? Let's go with candies. Cinnamon candies. I hate progressive
Did you
lenses.
ever make these? Did you ever make these as a kid?
You know
They're
what?
So good.
I vaguely remember, I don't know why, a candle, this is crazy, a candle on a wreath, and I think it kind of started a small fire or something. I don't know why. But gosh, yeah, cinnamon candles. You know what? I think in maybe elementary school, but out in the real world, I don't think so, no, not at home.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a kid's thing, but they're so buttery and sweet that kind of addicting, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, but anyway, Go on.
Well, anyway, you know, they're fun to make and eat. And how can you go wrong with a mixture of butter, marshmallows, and cornflakes? I'll tell you how. Not enough rum in it to help the kids go to sleep.
Well, there's that.
Yeah. So please go to our webpage for the recipe and a list of rums. Actually, has a new intern put up a list, or is she still researching? You know, I do admire her dedication. Yeah.
She is still researching.
Well, that's dedication for you. You know, actually, she seems a little too dedicated. So let's see, webpage, recipe, rum. Yes, resources. Also resources. Resources about the recordings of this topic and all our other topics. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and remember to rate and review this podcast. As a licensed nonprofit organization, we are dependent on your generosity and always appreciate your donations, which, by the way, are tax deductible. Please go to our webpage to donate in support of our work, www.everyonedies.org. That's every, the number one, dies.org. Marianne?
Thanks, Charlie. You know, grief during the holidays serves up that perfect storm where joyous moments crash with reality and expectations. And it's something that is especially tough when it's the child that's grieving. And our first reaction with the kids is to act normal when the situation that we're in is anything but. This can result in the child being confused and sad, mainly because no one's talking about the person or the pet that's died. So I wanted to give you some ideas of things that you can do to help with the situation. First, allow this year to be different. Trying to pull off the perfect holiday celebration will likely only cause you and the child more stress. In addition to the grief a major loss brings, there are secondary losses as well. If you're facing financial hardship, allow there to be fewer gifts this year. If you don't have the energy to cook a meal for the whole family, order out, go to someone else's house, or make reservations. Children are sensitive to your stress, so don't take on more than you can. There are many tips on the website that can help you, and be sure that you include your child in the conversation and the planning. It's really important to ask the child what is it they want or what is it they need at this stressful time. Now, typically families will have traditions as the child's growing up. So we have to, at this point, if they're grieving, balance new and old traditions. So let's say if a child's mother died and she was the person who usually read the night before Christmas to the family on Christmas Eve, what do? Do you skip it? You have someone else read it? Instead of trying to figure it out on your own, ask the child what they want to do. There really isn't a right or wrong answer. And this way, you're empowering the child to share their feelings, as well as to tap into their own ability to do grief work. This allows you to keep traditions that work, let go of those that don't, and create new ones because you want to, not because you have to. The other thing is, don't pretend that the death didn't occur. No one forgets that someone they love is missing. Pretending that everything is fine will not temper the pain. Instead, it'll add confusion to what is already a disorienting situation. Instead, talk openly with your child about how you both feel and how you miss them this year. This sends a clear signal to the child that talking about their feelings is encouraged and that you are a safe person that they can lean on. Lastly, ask them how they'd like to remember their special person during the holidays. Maybe they want to create a holiday decoration using photos of the special person, or write a letter to put in the deceased person's stocking. Letting the child set a place at the dinner table where the empty chair will be, or baking their favorite cookie recipe. There are countless ways to weave memories into family gatherings. Let the child weigh in on what they would like to do, and you'll have a great opportunity to teach them the power of remembering. And so Charlie's going to introduce our interview, and I hope you'll listen to the interview as she talks about how to help children with grieving. Charlie?
We are pleased to bring you an interview with Miranda Featherstone, who is a writer and social worker whose fiction has appeared in the St. Anne's Review. She has written about how to raise children without fear, even during the pandemic. She lives with her family in Rhode Island. We have a link in our resources to her recent publication in the New York Times titled, "Talking to Your Kids About Grief is Painful, and You Have to Do It."
Hello, welcome, Miranda Featherstone. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So I read your essay. It's called Talking to Your Kids About Grief is Painful, and You Have to Do It. And I thought, oh my God, yes, you have to do it. And tell me how you came to the conclusion that it's something that a parent or, someone who loves a child needs to do.
Sure. I mean, I think that the importance of it becomes clear if you have a child, and death is always present in different ways. And I explained to my older daughter, at a pretty young age, what death was and the universality of it. But I guess in my work with families, and also just, in conversation with friends who are parents, I grew increasingly aware that a lot of people just don't have the language to talk about death and grief with their young children or any children of any age. Yeah. And it's something that I've in my work as a social worker, I've given families language for and recommended books and pushed them towards clarity when there was sort of reluctance or uncertainty about what kids needed to hear or know. But it's also just something friends will call me up and be like, what do I say? And, or I told him about his grandpa dying, and I told him I was really clear about that, but then he asked, what cremation was, and I didn't know what to say, and so there's sort of all these moments where you can falter as a parent if you don't have a sense of, what language is developmentally appropriate and clear and necessary.
So what advice do you give your friends? What do you tell them to say?
I think, what I was told in my training and what I continue to believe is that anything can be explained to a child in a developmentally appropriate way, and it's a question. There's no topic that is sort of fundamentally off limits. You don't want to overwhelm them with specifics that they don't need, but clear, concrete information about illness and death and grief and pain and mourning rituals that we practice. Those are all things that can be explained, and that it's important to explain them. So there's a fair amount of evidence that shows that kids who are given information that they feel that they can trust and information that they understand, and are given warning when that's possible, that they do better. They process loss and trauma. They integrate it more into themselves. And I, as I said in the article, and as I always say to parents, it doesn't mean having that conversation and using all that great language is going to make it all great. It's awful to lose someone you love. Is awful, but it's what we can do. It's our job,
right?
And it is important.
Well, loss and grief alone are hard for us at any age. You don't have to be a kid for it to be hard. It's hard on us. But part of that role of being a parent, part of that role of loving a child is to educate them about all kinds of things, right? We teach them table manners and
exactly
a wide variety. Like someone gives you something, you say, "What do you say?" You teach them to say thank you and you're welcome. And this is should be on that list, but because of our fears, what do you think? Why is it that it's not on that list for most people?
Oh, it's so hard for people to talk about things that are just really sad and hard and bad. We just, as a culture, and I don't think our culture is particularly unique in that, but we're not there for it. Like, we just don't want to have those hard conversations. And with our kids, we want to protect them. People want to cushion their kids from things that are just unarguably sad and hard. And that impulse is understandable, but probably misguided. I think, teaching kids that pain can be endured, right? And that I think it's Mr. Rogers. I think he said all feelings can be named and all feelings can be survived, I think maybe. But I think that's one of the truest things, right? Like, if we can teach kids that this horrible experience or sensation has a name, and also you can withstand it, and I am here with you to help you withstand it. That's it, right? That's the most important thing.
I think that's really a really important point, Miranda, because I read, on Facebook, different groups, and you hear people, my mother died, and this is what they'll say: my mother died, and I don't want to live anymore, or my cat died, and I don't want to live anymore, or I don't know how to deal with this grief. And I think, well, there's this thought that I have that, well, if we taught children how to deal with grief, and that's why we wrote the book Everyone Dies, is that if we teach children when they're young, here's one of the realities of life, and it's sad and it's hard and it's difficult, but we're there with them. We help them process it. We, bury the pet in the yard. We have a ceremony. We go through that with them. Then they begin to learn, here's how it's done. Here's how you do it. Here's how you talk about it. Here's how you get through it, so that when we, as their mothers, die, part of our legacy is that they've learned this. What's your thought on that?
I do. I think that makes all kinds of sense, and I think that, dealing in a healthy way with pain that feels insurmountable is not something that we're very good at teaching kids or very good at as adults. I think there's, we can look to suicidality and to addiction and see that sort of those things are all connected. There's an enormous amount of suffering in being alive, in being a person. And I think, as you say, like, if you understand, if it's modeled for you and directly explained to you as a kid that it is normal to feel enormous pain, but that pain can be withstood, and you might need, in different times, you might need professional help with that pain. You might need antidepressants or, other psychotropic drugs. It's not that pain is always easy to get through. You might need quite a bit of support to withstand something, but it is withstandable. That's it's a valuable thing. And I think the other piece of what you're saying is that I think that adults are often not prepared for the overwhelming reality of grief. And I think that, myself as a kid, I think I had a really good understanding of death. My parents were very clear. I've written, and elsewhere about how my family had a child who died before I was born, and they were very frank in their conversations with me about his death and death in general. But I don't think, and I don't blame my parents for this, but I don't think I understood the enormity of grief, of their grief, and what grief is like. And perhaps some of that is not really possible to explain to a child or to help them understand. But I do think there's real value in saying to kids directly, like, when someone you love dies, you feel terrible. Like, it is really the hardest thing.
Right.
And you might feel terrible for a while, and you might not. You might feel terrible kind of intermittently. And, that there's all these different ways to experience grief. But it's really, it's really profound. And I think, as someone who's just lost a loved one, the folks who have been in my life who've been really just beautifully compassionate are people who've had a similar loss, and are able to say, not, oh, I know how you're feeling, but, are they able to say, like, oh, isn't it just awful?
Right.
Like, isn't it just the worst? And I'm so sorry that you're that you are having this awful thing, you know, and there's not an impulse to reach for platitudes or silver linings or to bright side, you know. It's just like, man, this stinks, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here for you, and I can't, you know, I don't have a platitude to lessen your pain, but I know that you're in pain. And that's valuable.
And I think you're right that you don't really realize how painful grief is. It's like somebody trying to explain childbirth to you, or you know, something. It's like, well, it's really going to hurt. Well, okay. Right? You know, because it's an inexplicable pain. And grief is an inexplicable pain. You have to feel it, and then you'll say, oh, they were right. Sucks. It's really horrible.
Yeah. I think that's a very apt parallel.
But at least,
you know, and
at least we know it's going to hurt, right? You know, it's like, we know it's not going to be a picnic.
No. But I think, I think that it's hard to describe.
Just before we started recording, you were telling me about your daughter explaining death to to a child who had never heard about death before. And I thought, what an incredible story. Do you mind telling it for our listeners?
Yeah. So when my daughter was about 6, she was with a friend, and she was extended family member of ours, an older person had recently died, and my daughter kind of mentioned it casually to the friend, as you do, you know, it's a thing that our family was going through, and the friend was like, asked for some clarity, was confused by this idea that somebody would die and, you know, what that was. And my daughter explained probably using some language from me, right? Like, you know, when people get very old or very sick or very hurt, they die. It means they're not alive anymore. But also, I think she got kind of impatient with the conversation. Like, the friend was a little bit younger, and, you know, this was new to her, and she was upset by it. And my daughter was like, well, you know, this is just how it is. Like, people die, right? Their bodies stop working. That's it. They're dead. They're not alive anymore. And at one point she became, I think, kind of exasperated and was like, well, everybody dies. You know, you're going to die. Your grown-ups are going to die. And the friend was like beside herself, really upset. The parents were subsequently, you know, not that happy with us and my daughter. It was sort of like a nightmare social dynamic for your play date there. It was not great. And it was also really hard to, you know, my daughter hadn't done anything wrong. You know, I mean, she sort of lost her temper further into the conversation. But she hadn't, you know, she was speaking the truth. She was talking about what she knew, what she knew to be true, and it was relevant to her life and her experience. And it was one of those things where, where it's tricky if death can't be, you know, something that is just talked about and that families have their individual languages for, and that the sort of the reality of it can't be discussed. That's hard.
Well, and I can see your daughter's point in that it's like saying, wait, what's a cookie? Like, what do you mean, what's a cookie?
Right.
Everybody knows what a cookie is, you know, because from her perspective, it's just, she's probably always knew about it. It was like anything else. If she asked a question, you gave her the answer. And so for this other little girl to not have ever had maybe somebody in her family die or a pet or whatever the circumstances were, it's like, this is just what goes on. This is the way it is. And how is it that you don't know about this? So I'm with your daughter. She can come work at Everyone Dies whenever she wants.
Yeah, she'd be an asset to your team.
She would.
She would. Shooter.
Yeah, she'd fit right in over here.
Yeah,
but I think that's the danger when you don't talk to your kids, when you don't let them know about these things, is because, it's like sex. If you don't have that open conversation with them throughout their lives, they're going to get to a point where someone else is going to explain it to them. Yeah. And it might not be the way you would have, It's going to come out in a completely different way.
It's a lot like sex. It's a lot like a lot of things. I think the same folks who do work in adoption, they talk about the same thing. Like, if you are an adoptive parent and you're speaking to your adoptee, nothing should ever really be big news. You should always be kind of giving them the story in developmentally appropriate ways, bit by bit, throughout their life, from jump.
Right.
If something's like, whoa, wait a minute, then you kind of, that's a sign that.
Well, it's funny. I'm adopted, and my parents always, as far as I ever knew, I always knew that I was adopted, and I knew the story, and I knew, the whole story. And I had this great aunt who, whenever we go anywhere, they'd say, "Oh, and this is Mary Ann," and my great aunt would say, in this loud stage whisper, "She's adopted." And we'd look at her like, seriously? I mean, even as a little kid, I can remember seriously?
Oh, that is too much.
Oh, yeah, So better comes from us as the parent, than out on the street or in a different way that's going to be potentially far more traumatic to the child.
Oh, completely. Yeah, no, all of it, death, sex, everything. You're really better off having that conversation initially at home. Even if you, as a parent, feel unprepared, you are better qualified than another 6-year-old to explain.
And there's good books out there that that can give you the words. Like Our Everyone Dies will give you the words. You say, here's what you say, and it's in story format. It just makes it a normal thing. There's sex books that do the same thing. You don't have to figure out what the words are. There's books that'll do it. I can remember I always would leave out age appropriate sex books for the kids if they, pick them up and read them, they could. And I had 2 daughters, and so there was a American Girl. I don't even know.
Oh yeah, I know that one. Yeah,
it's a great sex book for who would know, right? The American Girl. And my daughter and some of her friends were over, and they would pick it up and they would read it. And my daughter, I remember saying, "Mom, what? Does it hurt?" And I thought, no. What chapter are you on?
Yeah, right.
She says menstruation, and I said, "Oh, well."
An easier one.
You got to always be sure you know what question they're asking so you can give the right answer,
Yes. Well, I tell parents if it's appropriate to say to a kid when they ask you something, well, tell me what you know already.
Yes.
That's a really good way to make sure that you're not giving them way more information than they might need at that particular moment.
And answer only the question that they ask you. Don't get all flustered and give them way more information. Just, keep it simple, ask and answered. And when they want to know the next part of it, they'll ask you because they'll know that you're the person that'll tell them the truth. no matter what it's
Yes,
about.
I will. I agree. I do think in some cases you have to get ahead of things. Like a lot of people are like, well, I waited for my kid to bring up X and they just never did. So I'm off the hook, right? And I think some things we need to initiate, they need to say,
yeah. And some things you have to decide that this is what you need to know. I can remember when the girls were teenagers, I asked them for their phones, and I said, you can have these phones back when you can demonstrate putting on a condom and taking it off correctly. And they're like, well, it's like, that's part one, but part two is getting it off correctly so that everything doesn't dump in and make you pregnant or give you an STD. Yeah. And they're like, wait, what? I had their attention at that point. And I had, I think I used like a bottle of salad dressing or something. And they each had to demonstrate putting it on, taking it off. And
that's fabulous.
And then they're like bringing their friends over. Mom can teach you that. Be like, yeah, I can teach you that if you want, And it's funny, once you open up that line of communication, yeah, it is a life skill, doggone it.
It seriously is. Yeah,
I mean, I've had female friends who've had condoms stuck in them because they didn't take them out right, and to go fishing and to get it out. It's like, geez, didn't they teach you how to get this thing? Anyway,
there's a world of things that can go wrong. Yeah,
exactly. A lot can go wrong, and the way our bodies are, once it's stuck down in there, you can't get it out yourself. You need a girlfriend.
Indeed, there can be some real.
And y'all know my email, so just email me. I'll help you out. So Miranda, do you have any? Yeah. Do you have any last thoughts or things that you want to make sure you tell our listeners?
I don't. I mean, I think I always want to reiterate that I don't think people should feel like they need to know what to say. I mean, I think, as you say, books are great, books for kids. There are many, many books for adults. And the internet, if the internet gets a bad rap, there's a lot of bad information. But you can also, if you Google, how to explain, overdose to kids or addiction to kids or, death to kids, sometimes you gotta weed through some not so good stuff. But I think there's so many folks out there doing really good work about, developmentally appropriate ways to talk about hard things. And I think, use a book, use Google, ask a friend, ask for help, and don't feel like you're supposed to know just because you had a kid. They don't come with a manual, but you can buy some different manuals on Amazon. So I think that's me.
And also on our podcast, we have a resource section for every podcast, and I go through. I mean, I do what Miranda's telling you. I do that for you, and go through and say, here's additional resources that I've checked out, make sure that if they're correct. And so if you trust our work, I mean, there's that whole resource section of things that will help you. So that's another way too, is find podcasts or whatever that you feel you can trust and pay attention to what they're telling you too. Well, Miranda, I so appreciate you spending the time to talk with me today, and I hope you have good holidays. I know it's going to be hard with the death of your mom, but I'm sure you've got some good traditions that you can do with your kids, and that'll help you remember her.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she'll be absent, but also in some ways present. I appreciate
always.
Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure to talk. A pleasure to talk about grief and death. No, but it is really. It's a
grief, death, and sex. That's what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Miranda.
Please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. Like sand through an hourglass, so are the days of our lives. This is Charlie Navarrete reminding you of Robin Williams' observation that death is nature's way of saying, your table's ready.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we will see you next week. Remember, everything has meaning, and every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.